Thank you so much, Professor Justice. It's wonderful to be with you all. It's great to be back in Ghana. I lived in Ghana for 3 years in the 1990s. I spent this morning in Harare in Zimbabwe, this afternoon in the United Kingdom, and now I'm in West Africa in Accra, which is wonderful. This is the amazing world of Zoom during the pandemic. So my title tonight is Beyond Markets, Reciprocity, the Hidden Core of the Economy. What I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to speak. I'm not using slides tonight. I'm just going to speak to issues that every single one of us in this room and every single person around the entire globe, 7.4 billion people, these issues affect all of us. I'm framing this short talk in reference to St. Paul's epistle to the Romans, chapter 12, verses 1 to 6. Those of you who are familiar with the Bible, that will be not unusual to you. But I'm going to come to that text right at the end. But I'm going to start with one of the first questions that I ask my third-year undergraduate students. And I want you to think about this question as I ask it. They're beginning a course in the social economy. And here's the question. Have you ever helped anyone else for free? Have you ever helped anyone else for free? Takes a moment for the penny to drop. Only every day? So what did you do, I ask? Well, it takes a bit of time for the students to get going. Then one little student at the back of the room says, I helped my mum with the dishes. Another then says, I walk the dog. My dad and I take my kid brother to the game. Oh, now they're beginning to get the idea. A group of us help at the youth club. I'm part of the Sunday school rota at church. I do a turn at the food bank. Oh, Mum and I are part of the COVID-19 mutual aid group, visiting elderly people who are self-isolating, and we go to the shops for them. I'm part of the team helping to restore the local cinema. I get it. Does my woodland conservation work count? How about the litter pick that our community volunteers do? Or helping at the tennis club? Or. By this time, the responses are coming thick and fast. If I don't quieten them down, we'll never get through the lecture, and that would be terrible, because I'm paid to teach my students. So I ask them as supplementary. So, how did you calculate what to charge? They look at me blankly. I mean, on the invoice that you gave to your mum for helping do the dishes, how did you work out how much to charge? The student turns red with embarrassment. Maybe she's never going to speak up in class again. But she does volunteer. I never gave my mum an invoice. You asked us if we'd ever helped anyone else for free. There's a barbed tone in her response. I enjoy that. She's affronted by the suggestion that she should charge for helping at home. At this point, I stop messing with them and I tell the story of Biff and his son. We needed some work doing in our house, and our next door neighbor's brother, Biff, is a skilled joiner. So we contracted him to do some work for us. But after his second day working in our home, we got chatting about the challenges of balancing home and family and work and leisure. And it turns out that Biff's elder son is a talented rugby league football junior. He's got the potential for winning a sporting apprenticeship with Wigan Rugby League Football Club. That means that Biff spends at least a day and a half a week for 40 weeks a year ferrying his son, who doesn't drive, he's too young, from our community in southwest Cumbria, the 85 miles to Wigan and back. And Biff said, you know, the other night my wife and I sat down to calculate how much this costs in terms of diesel fuel. It came to about £3,500 a year. But what about your time off work to do all this ferrying, this taxiing around, I asked. He blanched. Well, add that in and it works out at about another 12,000. So that's about £15,500 a year. Yes, says Biff. But it looks like he'll get an apprenticeship and they'll pay for him to be at college in Wigan. And the housing and the food costs, I asked? Oh, we'll have to pay that, but it'll be worth it. It's an investment. Yes, I add, because you love your son. But will you get paid back as a return on that investment? Oh, I doubt it, says Biff. So my calculation as a social economist is that by the time Biff's son is earning a decent wage at one of England's top rugby league football clubs, it will have cost Biff in excess of £60,000 sterling, which he'll never get back. That's the extent of his love. But you see, he'd never thought to calculate it because it's just what families do. It's part of the love economy that exists beyond markets. Well, that's what one of my forthcoming books is about. The book's title is Beyond Markets, Mutualism and Reciprocal Capital in the Social Economy. And it's not just about supporting kids in sport, but all the reciprocal things that we do that we don't monetize or work out through markets. And more than that, it's about the concept and the theory of what I've termed reciprocal capital. By that, I mean those reserves of human wealth and well-being generated by social relations that are fungible as support and service outputs to fund mutual exchange, but without any financial transactions being involved. Considering the core economy. So, what is the value of all this reciprocal production beyond markets in the economics of the real world? As part of the movement for rethinking economics, there's an increasing sense that the conventional mainstream discipline has substantially failed to estimate production and consumption activity in the real world. Equally, the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, over and above the underlying warning drumbeat, in Africa you'll understand that metaphor of the climate emergency, has hastened the sense of urgency that global capitalism needs a reset. And such a view isn't confined to left-leaning commentators. This is a considered standpoint of central bankers, of corporate leaders, of global business champions. There's a widespread recognition of the significant part that social economies play in sustaining society, helping to meet the needs of vulnerable sectors, particularly in times of crisis like this. But even that understanding has often failed to consider the normal, everyday, productive activity that takes place in families and households, among local networks, in communities, as a result of the burgeoning social solidarity economies that are emergent in many parts of the world. Such household production, voluntary support, mutual aid operates outside of markets. It involves hardly any monetary exchange, and it reflects the fundamentally reciprocal nature of economic life. Yet production beyond markets and money remains relatively invisible to mainstream economics, and it's hardly taught on conventional university courses, even at postgraduate level. This is despite some radical economists recognizing that household production is actually the core of the economy. Markets are just the periphery. In consequence, there's a vital need to address the issue of how do we identify, measure, and understand this facet of economic life. It accounts for almost half of all production in many societies, and at least 1/4 in so-called advanced countries like the United Kingdom, and it will be much higher in countries such as Ghana. I've kept a brief association with Ghana over the years, been greatly impressed by the work of one of your cocoa cooperatives, Kuapa Koku, with their strapline and refrain, "Pa pa pa, the best of the best." Because the pa 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 doesn't only refer to the cocoa that they produce, but the social economy, the way that they produce it for divine chocolate and the fair trade movement. As such, I've determined to teach and research these themes with my undergraduate and postgraduate students for several years. And I explain to them that when all these reciprocal activities, these areas of production where no money is transacted, which exist beyond markets, when all of those are aggregated together for a society, the value of such work is equivalent to between 1/4 and 1/2 of the entire national income. And in the UK, that's official. From the Office of National Statistics in the UK, that reciprocal household and voluntary and community network work amounts to £1.1 trillion per year, or between 45 to 50% equivalent of gross domestic product. That's the calculation that the Office of National Statistics reached on the basis of their latest household satellite account. If you want to know about those, I can talk about those during questions. Reciprocal capital calculus in theory. So such insights point us back to the very early decades of economic thinking. Reciprocity and mutualism was an important theme for such important foundational political economists as Adam Smith on the political right, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon on the left, John Stuart Mill in the center ground. Each identified the critical role of reciprocity and mutual exchange as the basis for economic life. It came to be seen as the operational construct for markets, in which reciprocal relations were embedded as moral sentiment, Smith, cooperativism, Proudhon, fairness, John Stuart Mill. In consequence, 20th century economic philosophers like Karl Polanyi identified market capitalism as having put an end to reciprocity. And more contemporaneously, social philosophers like Michael Sandel in his book, What Money Can't Buy, have suggested that market economies have been replaced by market societies where almost all aspects of social life are becoming marketized. Well, I get the point that Sandel is making, but I beg to differ. cultural and economic anthropologists have been less willing to sound the death knell for mutualism. Over the last century, beginning with great people like Claude Lévi-Strauss, Marcel Mauss, the principle of gifting has been seen variously and contradictorily as the basis for social cohesion or social coercion, for open or closed exchanges, for debt or social capital formation. But the social fact of non-market household production, particularly in the developed world, away from exotic tribal groups in remote locations, has appeared to hide in plain sight. Such it's the standpoint of my work to unveil the hiddenness of everyday non-market economic exchanges. Through it, I seek to recover the principle of reciprocity, which, though widely written about, is not readily identified as a feature of normal economic discourse within capitalist societies. So in my research, I'm engaged in both theoretical and empirical inquiry to show that it's both possible and vital to uncover the meaning and real-world extent of mutualism. The possibilities can be seen methodologically. The experiential nature is shown from recent research into household community and voluntarism at national economy levels. But the empirical analysis involves work that I've done on household satellite accounts, updated in the light of work being done by the OECD and World Bank. But having looked at theories of mutualism and reciprocity in some detail, I consider the intricacies of economic methodologies applied to non-market production. So how do we measure these things as economists? Well, a standard distinction is made between analyses based on measuring the value of either opportunity costs or of substitution replacement work. Think about something as basic as doing the laundry, doing the ironing at home. Well, you can value that at a standard price rate, such as the living wage, for the hours taken to do the laundry. Alternatively, you can look at the cost, the value of doing that household work as the cost of contracting the ironing out to a local laundry. Two different ways of measuring that household production beyond markets where no financial transaction take place. Of course, they produce markedly different results. The latter one produces a much higher value than the former. But what my work shows is that this approach to measuring the costs and the value of household production produces staggering things. But it also produces real economic distinctions between diverse local and national cultures. For example, between Britain and the Scandinavian countries, or indeed between Britain and a country like Ghana. That's some of the theory. What about reciprocal capital calculus in practice? Well, part of our recent experience of mutualism during the coronavirus pandemic has been, we've seen a lot of helping out being done in communities. And so something that we're beginning to look at is empirical data on strategies for enabling local resilience through COVID-19 mutual aid groups. We've seen that a number of mutual aid groups started up very early and were able to be very resilient in local communities. But I wanted to give you one practical example of the way in which we can look to measure this reciprocal capital and this mutualism in practice. Every Thursday evening in the UK for 10 weeks, from April to July, millions of people, we don't know precisely how many, gathered on their front doorsteps or outside their houses and in communities to clap as a sign of support for members of the UK National Health Service. Ordinary people gathering on their doorsteps to honour the work of doctors and nurses and paramedics and healthcare professionals and social care workers in community homes for all the work that they were doing during the pandemic. Now, unlike Ghana, Britain is no longer a very religious Christian country. But it's often said that if the British people have any religion, that religion is the honouring and the protecting of the National Health Service. Along with the BBC, it's the jewel in the crown of British culture, so many people argue. So this clap for carers on a Thursday evening can be viewed as one example of reciprocal capital in action. And we can calculate its monetary equivalent and indeed its capacity as a form of capital to generate a revenue return on its capital formation. Of course, such measures will be highly contested and indicative, and they may even be regarded as counterproductive. I'll come back to that in a moment. But let's have a go at the calculation. How many people clapped? Well, we don't actually know. There's a wide range of estimates between maybe 500,000 and 5 million people per week. How long did they clap for? Well, it will have varied. The minimum recommended was 1 minute per week, but from personal experience myself, Abdul-Razak and Assad may have their own experience of this. It often went on for 10 minutes, but I'm going to be conservative. We're going to say 3 minutes per week. That means 3 minutes over 10 weeks, 30 minutes over a 10-week period. Well, how should we estimate the value of the time spent? Well, there are a number of different ways we could do this. A more conservative way is to average everyone's time at a standard rate, like the national living wage, which in Britain at the moment is £8.72 per hour, or about £18,000 a year. Alternatively, we could seek to substitute the value of that time for the salaries of all those involved in this non-money activity. Well, I can go into all the details, but I've worked out a fairly conservative way of doing it, working out an average notional hourly income of £8.66 per person, very close to the national living wage. On that basis, a minimum monetary value of the clap for carers time usage would be about £700,000 over that 10 weeks. But if we take the larger number of people and a slightly less conservative view of the value of their time, it comes to over £21 million over that period of time. So we take a midpoint, about £10.5 million. That's the value of that time that people gave in clapping for their doctors and their nurses and their healthcare professionals and their paramedics and the people in the care homes looking after elderly and sick and vulnerable people. Some of you will have had that experience during the pandemic. According to the World Bank, the UK's gross capital formation in 2019 was 17%. That's the form of capital to generate a revenue stream. So on the basis of the calculation that I've done for the clap for carers, we could say that that reciprocal capital could generate a revenue stream of about £63 million. Now, here's the interesting thing. As a result of the clap for carers, the UK government promised the British people to give an award of greater than inflation to all those healthcare professionals and paramedics and social care professionals in those care homes. About 900,000 public sector workers given about a 1.4% above inflation pay settlement. That amounts to about £327 million. What I said was the potential revenue if my calculations for the Clap for Carers reciprocal capital pay £27 million, only partly as a result of the Clap for Carers, but still partly as a result of the Clap for Carers, because the government saw the sensibility of the British people to want to honour those people in the healthcare professions. So on this basis, we can argue that the reciprocal capital of the Clap for Carers generated about 1/5 of the extra revenue income paid to public sector workers, partly in recognition of their many sacrifices during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, it's likely that the UK government was considering a greater than inflation award to public sector workers even before this show of civil society support and popular mobilisation. Equally, it's highly likely that the Clap for Carers had some impact on public sector pay policy, and a figure of influencing this to about 1/5 is not an unreasonable suggestion. Of course, a moment's consideration and my figures could be highly contested on all sorts of grounds. Of course, they're really back of the envelope calculations. At the same time, I'm willing to stand by them as a conservatively arrived at guesstimate and demonstration of how to give a money value to reciprocal capital. But there is a more trenchant critique of what I've just done, which is to try and calculate a monetary value or price for reciprocal capital formation. And that criticism is that it's illegitimate and entirely misses the point to do that. Because reciprocal capital is a theoretical concept to demonstrate that social relations and support and help and love that we give to one another, to share within society, is beyond markets. It's outside the constraints of price functions. It cannot really be given a precise money value. And I'm very sympathetic to that argument. However, as I conclude, conventional mainstream economics hardly notices the extent of household production, community volunteering, civil society support as having any economic value, despite it being worth 1/3 to 1/2 equivalent of the entire productive output of a country like the United Kingdom. It is not inconsiderable, particularly in respect of the lives of women and families. In fact, it's of enormous significance as a guide to the power of the social economy on which society rests beyond markets and such business institutions as social enterprises and cooperatives, beyond those as well. So my argument is that if we don't attempt to apply some numbers, prices, some money values to reciprocal capital, no matter how indicative and contested they might be, most economic commentators will simply fail to consider its significance. But equally, I agree with those who argue that the core of the economy exists outside of money transactions and beyond markets. The markets are really just the periphery. I said that I was framing this as I finish through St. Paul's epistle to the Romans chapter 12, verses 1 to 6. In that passage, Paul urges us to present our lives, our material capacities, as mutual sacrifices to one another and to God. We aren't to regard ourselves as more highly than the gifts of faith that have been given to us. Our value is in the gifts of God amongst us. And so we're to share our gifts with one another, mutually and reciprocally, according to the grace, that means God's free gifts that we have been given. This is the nature of love from God, shared between ourselves, given to others and the whole society. We might call this material sacrifice proceeding from the grace of God a form of capital that is reciprocally shared, not only with the church and amongst religious people, but it's reproduced in every person and every family under heaven. It's reciprocal capital, and on it rests the entire structure of society beyond markets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Reverend Bradley, for such an insightful presentation. We now invite questions from our participants. Please, you can raise your hand and give us your question, or you can type your question in the chat so that I read it out to the presenter. Thank you so much.
Stunned silence.
Yes, my hand is up.
Hi.
Hi, Prof. Thank you very much for a very insightful presentation. I do agree with you on a number of factors. Even the mainstream economists have attempted to measure some hidden market values. So if you look at the value between, accounting calculation and economics calculation,
Yep.
The economists have often gone further to calculate some hidden, value system that accounting factors are not taken into consideration. But yet, I agree that there are certain hidden, market consideration that we still need to consider in terms of calculating the value of our GDP. If you look at some countries like Bhutan, they've gone further to add some variables to their GDP, which they call happiness index.
Yeah, the
so
Bhutan
they don't
happiness
just
index.
look,
Yeah.
yes, they look at more factors beyond the classical economics consideration for the calculation of a GDP.
Yeah.
So it is very good work that you have started for us to expand the scope or the basket of variables that we use in calculating the economic value of our production system, whether household level, at the church level, or at the community level, or at the country level. But I have some interesting questions for you.
Yeah.
One, in terms of quantifying those hidden or reciprocal production system, we must be very careful. If not, we might blow it out of proportion.
Yep.
We need to look at the opportunity cost. For example, if I do not go to pick my wife from the hospital, or I do not take my child to school at that particular time, what will I be doing? Will I be sitting idle, or will I be putting that time to productive activity? If I will be idle, then there is no economic value, because whether I took my child to school or I went to the hospital to pick my wife, I wouldn't have been doing anything. So when you want to put economic value on that, we will be blowing out of proportion the value of our production system. And it will be quite difficult to be able to measure whether or not at that particular moment we would have been able to put our time to good use or otherwise. So that will be one of the limitations to your attempt to develop, some equation or some modeling to measure that. The second thing that I want you to look at, you made mention of the fact that this reciprocity and mutualism enable society to build certain local resilience, and you use COVID-19 as a case study.
Yep.
What we should be looking at also is to look at the negative aspect. We have to start a conversation to look at how mutualism has increased nepotism and corruption. So if we compare the developed country and developing country, we want to look at which of these countries exhibit high sense of mutualism and reciprocity, and then look at the level of corruption. How does it relate? Before we might be able to project and say that mutualism is something good that helps in building resilience. Perhaps mutualism in itself makes societies more vulnerable. So we cannot just look at it on a face value and conclude that during COVID-19, mutualism really helped us in building resilience. For example, the social support system in Ghana or in India, in terms of sharing goods and otherwise, it might be going to some group of people and not everybody that will be getting. So these are some of the things that we need to look at in terms of elevating the conversation about reciprocity and mutualism. But it's a good program that you have started, and I commend you. We need to start from somewhere before we'll be able to refine it into theory. Thank you.
Those are tremendous comments. Thank you so much. I think on the first point, to do with do we look at the opportunity cost of time usage in terms of whether it's economically productive in a market sense or whether it might be idling, it's quite a complex issue. So, for example, and I'm going back to some work that Joe Stiglitz and Amartya Sen did, which is part of the basis of the Bhutan Happiness Index and the work that has been done in France on recalculating national income accounts. Actually, that time that is quotes unquote idling can be time spent in leisure activities, which, supposing you decide that you want to go out for a run or that you want to ride a bike, that's not economically productive, is it? It's not generating any wealth. What it is doing, however, is keeping your body better protected and giving you exercise. That's actually going to save your health services the cost of actually looking after you if you don't take exercise. And there are all sorts of things. In fact, in Britain just yesterday, there was a policy announcement to give people food parcels to develop healthier eating practices. Increasingly, governments around the world are beginning to see that the ways in which we've divided up productive economic, leisure, and household activity isn't really a 360 degrees way of looking at life. We need to be much more careful in terms of understanding the actual inputs, outputs, throughputs, impacts of the ways in which we live. And I guess the point that I'm making is that we do need to take productive activity that is beyond markets much more seriously and look with a much more fine-grained insight at it. The second point you raise never occurred to me, and I really do need to think about that, about how reciprocal capital actually could generate corruption. And I can see from perhaps a perspective in some parts, I'm not suggesting in Ghana at all, but in some parts of the world that could really be an issue. Yeah. So thank you very much for that insight. Really, really helpful.
Thank you for that response. We take our next question. Who is ready?
I think I can go if no one is coming in. I think this is an area of the social economy that is normally not spoken about, and for obvious reasons, because the indicative measures are very controversial.
Yep.
However, we are aware that the impact and value of this is to the wider economy is great, and there should be some level of calculating this. However, my question is, if you look at it within the wider scheme in terms of organization to organization,
yep,
or nation to nation, how are we able to translate this in economic terms?
Gosh, that is such an important question, Abdul. One of the things that I've been reflecting on in relation to this is in terms of the way in which the World Bank and the IMF make judgments about the economic performance of countries. And we know that global financial institutions can be very heavy-handed in the way in which they operate with certain governments and certain societies. One of the things that my initial work on household satellite accounts indicated was that in a country such as Ghana, the indicative value of reciprocal capital and of household production is going to be actually in excess of 100% of gross domestic product. On that basis, we should be viewing the mutualism and the reciprocity of those societies as enormously valuable to maintaining the way in which society functions and to actually seeing the reproduction of economic systems on the back. And I just made a throwaway comment at one point about the significance of what I'm doing in terms of the impact of women and families. Particularly, and I saw you smile at that particular point, particularly in so-called, I don't like this expression, but it's shorthand, particularly in less developed or mid-developed countries. I don't like that language, but we know what we mean by that. The role of women and families in supporting what we see as the market-based economic activity is absolutely massive. And those structures, those social structures, ought to be recognized by global financial institutions. Now, you can look at a country like the United States, and you can actually see that household production is a fraction of what it is in a country like Ghana. It's actually much smaller than it is in the UK. That's because gross domestic product in the United States is built on very poor welfare systems, on people working longer hours than in virtually any other nation in the world, and therefore not having time to spend in reciprocal activities in their households, in their families, and their communities. So we might look at the United States of America and say, this is the gold standard of an economy that we should all aim at. But if we only use productive market-based gross national product as our measuring rod, we actually miss a fundamental about the nature of society and the reproduction of human communities. So, you know, that's a long-winded answer to a very good short question, which is that we need to take these things into account in order to more effectively understand what is the political economy and what is the real value of the societal development in the countries we're looking at. And that work needs to be done really at a global and multinational level, and needs to actually impact institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. And I know there's some work being done in the OECD to do precisely that.
Thank you. Who comes next?
That's probably enough from me.
No, Prof. I think we still have a lot of questions for you, but this is quite a very complex field that, in terms of digesting it, is quite difficult to. So we do understand and we do appreciate the attempt to even break it down for a lot of people to follow the discussion. I am with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we have started developing, we're doing some futuristic thinking, and we want to see a future where we build that kind of resilience, a future where we go beyond, institutional borders and institutional limitations to live in a virtual world where there are no limitations. And this is one of the things that comes in, where we can be able to expand the scope of our value in our economy, to be able to create equal opportunity for all. For example, in Ghana, we have a lot of resources that are beneath the earth. How do we put value on these resources?
Absolutely.
That becomes a guarantee for us to be able to raise enough resources from the capital markets, to build the economy. How do we put value on the role that women and children play at the household level, so that we can expand our GDP, and that become basis for us to be able to raise enough money from the World Bank? So I think this is a very great area, but important issue that you are considering. Yeah. And I'll be very happy to invite you to join our program, and I'll send you a link so that maybe we can move it forward. Then maybe I can have you as a keynote speaker in some of our program to be able to, break some of these complex issues down for us. Yeah.
They are complex, but they're vitally important. Thank you very much for that comment. Yeah, vitally important.
Our participants on Facebook also sent some comments through. And I have Lee Ford here saying that interesting. It was the same concept of valuing time for mutual social or reciprocal capital that leads to the argument of housewives getting paid. Yet, if we say beyond markets and we agree that housewives are driving household economic value through their support, then do we agree that perhaps they are underpaid or overpaid because of the lack of proper valuation of work?
Yeah, yeah.
Doctor,
this may not be true in Ghana, but in many Western countries, one of the things that has been most remarkable during the pandemic is how suddenly Western governments have embraced issues like universal basic income. That is to say, helicopter drop. Just giving people money for the sake of the need to keep the wolf at the door. This would be very difficult in a country like Ghana. It's difficult enough in a country like the United Kingdom, but we've seen enormous moves in that sort of direction. The point that your person has made there is that when we start to value that household productive activity of those young mums, it gives to society a rationale behind principles like helicopter drop and universal basic income. Instead of just, as a lot of neoliberal economists would argue, that simply paying people to be lazy and indolent, it's actually saying, no, we're rewarding people for what they're doing to preserve and protect society. Now, of course, in a country like the UK, we have welfare benefit systems, but they have been eroded and eroded and eroded since the 1980s. We've had 30 years of reduction of welfare benefits. Now we're seeing the tide turning because of the coronavirus pandemic. We need to have some economic analysis that enables politicians and social policy people to be able to legitimize why they should be developing things like universal basic income. So I completely agree with your comment.
Thank you. We have Dr. Mahmood. Dr. Mahmood, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much, James, for giving me the opportunity. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, please.
Good. So, Prof, thank you very much for your Thank you very much for the presentation. I missed a large part of it, but I was just looking at the title, trying to understand it. Beyond markets, reciprocity, the hidden core of the economy. And I'm looking at, if you are going to discuss this kind of topic, I'm beginning to appreciate what you are seeing. Then we need to also take the various economic into considerations, because we have some planned economies and we have liberal economies, and there are differences. And then when you come to Ghana, so for Ghana, for instance, maybe I understand Ghana very well. I'll use it as an example. Sometimes the institutions, like the world institutions, don't seem to understand some of this reciprocity that you talk about in our practices. So for instance, if you have somebody staying with an uncle and the uncle pays your school fee,
Unfortunately, we are losing Dr. Mahmood.
I think I've lost that.
Yes, we lost him. But I think he was trying to raise a very good point about the Ghanaian society where we take care of each other. Our parents are taking care of us for us to grow so that we also take care of them when they are old. Yep. And so that kind of angle is where he's coming from. I'm sure he will get back to us and then continue with the question. Okay, so before he joins us back, please, can anybody go ahead if you have any question?
Dr. James, let me ask Prof. Does he have a blog? If somebody is interested in his work, how do we get to follow his work? Where can we get more materials to read? Probably if that announcement was done, many people have not joined at that time. Can we get that announcement again? And if a student is interested in doing something related, is there potential for funding around that area? Is he interested in recruiting graduate students? These are some of the things that we want to hear.
Okay.
So I'm not sure I heard all of that, but was that about where we find more material on this, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. I'm slightly hesitant because I haven't written the book yet, but there is material that we're producing. I'll certainly send the transcript of the paper and some other materials that I'm producing. There are some economists working on quite similar areas to this. I would certainly encourage people to read the work of a Korean economist who works at the University of Cambridge, Ha-Jun Chang, maybe what I'll do is produce a short reading list. Would that be helpful?
Yes, please. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I'll do. Okay. I'll send a short reading list.
We have Dr. Mahmood on the line. Dr. Mahmood, if you can hear us, please.
Yeah, I can hear you now, but so I don't know whether my question was clear.
No, we lost you, I'm afraid,
James.
Dr. Mahmood.
James.
Yes, you can go over again with your question.
Yes, my question is, I'm just wondering whether, as I said, I missed a lot of the presentation, but to tackle such a topic without looking at the various types of economies that we have in the world. We know we have the two extreme ones are the planned and the unplanned economies, okay? And I was given a scenario where in Ghana, sometimes we do hear our cocoa beans are being rejected because we are using child labor on our farms. And I see some reciprocity in there where usually people live with uncles, and definitely you have to follow or even your father has a cocoa farm and you go in there, and then your school fees are kind of paid. You know, how we in this part of the world, we don't see anything wrong with that. There is that kind of hidden value in there. But sometimes maybe in the West, it's interpreted differently.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to know whether the presenter has actually touched on all this. I mean, if you want to talk about.
So when I started out on this,
I mean, if you look at this topic from the Western point of view.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
So if you look at it from the Western.
I think we lost him again.
Yeah.
You lost me.
Oh, please, yes, you are back?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, so I was just saying, I mean, I gave a scenario.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes. So I'm looking at what is happening. Okay, let me summarize it. What the prof has covered, what is happening in planned economies, right, and that of
okay.
Okay.
If I can interpret
planned economies.
Yeah. If I can interpret what's being asked. When I started on this journey, I did an international comparison of household satellite accounts for a number of different societies around the world. One of the things that I was able to show was that in Eastern European, more planned economies that were less focused on Western capitalist development, levels of household production were much lower, and they actually were really rather similar to the more neoliberal capitalist societies like the United States and the United Kingdom. So there is a lot of work to do. I mean, it's a huge area. There's a lot of work to do with international comparisons. The difficulty I found, and you guys may be able to point me in the direction of some data, the difficulties I found in trying to make comparisons in Africa is, apart from South Africa and some work done in Ethiopia, I've not been able to find household satellite accounts for most African countries.
Okay, thank you very much, James. I'm okay.
We need to move on, I think, to our second speaker.
Okay, so without further questions, we want to thank Reverend Dr. Bradley for such a wonderful presentation. In fact, I must admit that we have learned a lot from this presentation, and most of the colleagues who want to get in touch with you for further reading materials and maybe more enlightenment about this topic. So
you've been enormously helpful to me, and I'm really grateful. I'm very, very grateful for the trenchant questions. Yeah, so thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. So we move on to take our next presenter. That is Dr. Abdul-Razak Alhassan from the University of Birmingham City. Doc, your audience.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you to the Business School for the invitation to be part of this. I've been a keen follower of the series, and I'm happy to be presenting on it as well. I have prepared a few slides to help with my presentation today. I'll just share that with you.
Please do.
Okay. Over the last couple of weeks, I have followed keenly what has been presented on the series. And I must admit that we've had a lot of speakers from both academia and those coming from practice or industry who have talked a lot about the impact of COVID-19 on various sectors. I think it is early days yet, we probably are not in a position now to appreciate the extent to which COVID has impacted businesses. But one of the groups that probably we haven't focused much on is the effect of this pandemic on small and medium enterprises. So I'm not going to spend time to talk about effect and impact of COVID on small, medium enterprises, but rather how these small and medium enterprises are coping in light of the pandemic. But I want to throw in the issue of institutional voids, because this has ramifications on what is currently happening and the problems that small and medium enterprises, especially within developing country settings, are facing. So without much ado, I'll just start with the presentation. And it is clear by way of background that the ability of firms to do business is facilitated or constrained by the environment in which they operate. And by extension, we are not only talking about the environment itself, but institutions that have an active or key role to play in the environment that these small, medium enterprises or firms operate in. To this end, the performance and attainment of key objectives of these businesses, whether it is an objective of survival, one of growth, or one of competitiveness, is shaped by the ability of firms or organizations to manage those institutional contexts in which they operate. Whilst in certain settings, there are very formal, supportive institutions that facilitate businesses. This cannot be said for certain countries, especially those that are within the developing setting. And I would give certain key examples. Since COVID hit, we have heard in certain countries that the government and other institutions have provided support, especially for small, medium enterprises. In the UK, we have employees who have been furloughed. So in any case, they tend to keep their jobs until their organizations or businesses or firms can get back into operation and therefore would not lose their jobs. We've also had incentives in terms of grants and loans with very considerate conditionalities that are available to small, medium enterprises, etc. In very key contrast within developing country settings, we've rather heard about governments giving tax exemptions or waivers. But in a situation where the environment in which businesses are operating is come to a standstill, like it happened because of measures put in place to curtail the spread of COVID in many countries, how do you give exemptions for what they haven't been able to earn in terms of raise as income for these businesses? So that is not suggestive of institutions that are very putting measures in place that are very supportive of small, medium enterprises. To a varying degree, the way and manner in which these institutions impact SMEs is different when you compare it to a developed or developing country setting. So whilst it is important that we look at holistically strategies that are being put forward by SMEs to cope under this pandemic, and also the area of institutional voice that exists or are present in the economies that they operate, it is more peculiar to look at it, especially within a developing country setting. There are reasons for this. One is that those institutional factors affect not only the startup, but also the management and growth of businesses, either positively or negatively. Normally, when we talk about the impact or effect of COVID, we are naturally drawn to the negative impact. However, there are glimpses of opportunities available to certain sectors or enterprises, and certain small, medium enterprises are taking advantage of this. For example, in the area of IT, I think we have all been living virtual for a couple of months now. Dr. Tony Bradley actually said he was in different places today. Yes, and that is achievable. And certain IT, small, medium enterprises, etc., are benefiting from the opportunities that COVID presents to them. But generally, there are more negative impacts than we see in terms of opportunity within the discussions that we have. Based on what I've just said above, we have, in terms of institutional theory, the emergence of two key opposing strands or arguments or perspective school of thoughts with regards to the impact that institutions or the lack of institutional voice have on SMEs. We have what is known as the institutional support perspective. And this proponents of this actually argue that the existence of effective institutions enables organizational growth. And to a large extent, the overwhelming literature supports this position. We also have what is known as the institutional void perspective. And proponents of this rather argue that the lack of or ineffectiveness of institutions acts as constraints on entrepreneurial development. And they cite, to a large extent, countries that are regarded as developing countries and why SMEs are not emerging or growing as they should. I know in Ghana, we normally have a saying that our problems in Ghana is not the lack of institutions, but the ineffectiveness of these institutions. And this is one of the key issues that we need to see, how effective we can make these institutions. So my presentation today would focus on institutional voice and constraints to SMEs development and growth. And there's a reason why I have chosen this, because our understanding, insights on this issue has mostly been based on developed context. And these are sometimes misaligned with our current realities facing organizations, especially in the developing world. To a large extent, those that are understanding all literature that are available within the context of developing countries or developing settings are mostly about resource-endowed multinational enterprises and the strategies they adopt to navigate the institutional deficiencies that exist. So this does not more or less portray the efforts that SMEs are doing. And so that becomes the focus of this discussion. However, it is important that we understand that we cannot use a developed country settings as a generalized format for all countries in respect of this. So as a result of this, we need to develop our own understandings and strategies that are suitable for the kinds of institutions or environments that we exist in. And in lieu of the above, we have to deepen and strengthen our understanding and the nature of SME strategic responses to institutional voids. So specifically, I'll just briefly try to explore the strategies that SMEs in Ghana are identifying and adopting to cope with institutional voice as well as COVID within an underdeveloped setting. Let me, before I go into examples of these strategies that they adopt, make it clear that when I talk about the environment and the lack of institutions or institutional voice, this is not restricted to the institutions not being available, but it could be extended to having ineffective institutions, as I've given in the case of what has been put forward to support SMEs within a developing country setting, as opposed to what is being done within a developing country setting. Interestingly, this is just part of an ongoing study that is to look at coping strategies that SMEs are using in Ghana. And what has emerged has been the innovative, strategic, creative approaches that are being adopted by SMEs to cope with institutional voids and COVID. Now, for most of them, these strategies could be one of seeking to survival. That means they don't want to collapse within the current climate. They want to exist until things get back to normalcy. But for some, it has been an opportunity that they've been able to see for which they are taking advantage of. I'll try to give examples of some of these strategies, but what we have come up with, it is grouping the coping strategies into three key strands. So we have creative action, we have connection, and we have capability building and education. These are the core of the coping strategies that we have been able to identify SMEs in Ghana adopting. So in terms of creative action, we've seen some SMEs focus on adaptive distribution and delivery and engaging with individual partners and going further to using tried and tested approaches, such as having small contracts given out to people or suppliers instead of just giving large contracts when they definitely know that they may have instances where the suppliers cannot fulfill the contract that they have to deliver. We've also seen some, in terms of connection, established relationship, and I'll give examples of this. Informal partnerships that is based on trust, because there isn't time enough for some people to sit down and write or arrive at a contractual arrangement with partners in terms of proceeding on some form of partnership. So this is normally based on trust and referrals by, it could be pastors within the church, someone knows someone else, and therefore they link them up to it. But we've also seen others who have been able to develop capacity to refocus their operations into areas that presents opportunity under this present climate. Let me just give examples of what I mean with regards to this. When it comes to distilleries that are into the production of alcohol, etc., we've come and we've seen examples of some who have realized that under strict lockdown measures that were in place in Ghana, and they realized they had no opportunity to produce more products that will go out into the market, they reverted and set up production lines to work on putting together hand sanitizers and alcohol gels. So that is a creative way of taking advantage of opportunities that exist within a bad environment. However, it also had to do with being capable of building and training their staff to be able to deliver and take advantage of those opportunities. So within that, you would see that it cuts across the coping strategies that we have. There are other instances. For example, education. Someone asked me, this is not specific with public schools, but private schools that operate and make money out of teaching others, within lockdown measures, struggled, and for most of them, they were losing staff. So I know we have parents here who have kids in private schools, and these private schools have expected parents to keep up with paying school fees, even when students were not attending schools, albeit with some discounts. But for some of these private schools, they were able to demand such payments because they had instituted strategies that meant that they could deliver some form of teaching using normal platforms that the children could engage in, such as Facebook, such as WhatsApp, where they delivered teaching, and also opened up their doors where parents came in, brought the homework that they had given already to kids to complete, and they mark and return it to parents in a drive-through process. So you don't even come, you sit in your car and these exchanges are made. So that has been the coping strategies for private schools that are taking, putting together coping strategies in light of COVID and also the institutional voice that exists. We've had numerous examples of, for example, partnership. I think one of the schemes that would benefit a lot from is the National Service Scheme. I know of a lot of SMEs that are currently lobbying. They are lobbying the National Service Secretariat to get personnel posted to them because they are not able to keep up with paying for employees that they have. But with National Service personnel, it comes, they have the human resource and they do not have to expense that level of cash. So they are benefiting from it. We have tailors, etc., who have taken advantage of it, and they are more producing PPE. They are producing face shields, face masks, etc. And these are the coping strategies that some of these small, medium enterprises have adopted. So you can see that it is one of creative action, it's one of connections, and it's one of capacity or capability building and education to take advantage of the little glimpses of opportunities that exist within a bad situation, but also to be able to exist and survive until things get back to normal. I have a few quotes that some small, medium enterprises and those who run them have said. For example, one has said that I do a lot of public speaking engagement through social media now. And that is to say that they have the opportunity now to engage in virtual public speaking for some income just to survive because their business or offices are not opening. We have others who partner a lot of local and international organizations in light of this to be able to survive. We have others who are more or less relying on competitors who are not operating for supplies of products that they have to meet demands for their clients. And this cross collaborative partnership that competitors have wouldn't normally exist in normal times. So there are certain key strategies that SMEs are adopting in light of the COVID situation. I'll be interested in knowing if we have anybody here who is has a business or working with an SME, what their own strategies have been to cope with the issues of COVID. But in conclusion, we have realized that in light of the COVID and institutional voice that exist or are present in a developing country setting like we have in Ghana, SMEs adopt various strategies. This could be relational, creative action, training and development, formal planning, etc., to tackle the effect of this and to survive until things get back to normal. Others are taking advantage of the glimpses of opportunities that they see. By implication, it is imperative that all key stakeholders, be it government, etc., develop an understanding of the challenges that SMEs are facing during this pandemic and how they are responding to these in terms of the lack of institutional void, etc. And this has wider implications for their survival, growth, and competitiveness. Why? Because it will help in policy development. The other thing is that it has implications on the management of SMEs themselves in the context of institutional voids and how these present themselves. But finally, the strategic responses that have been revealed and that SMEs are adopting in light of this should provide insights into policies that are needed to address the impediments to entrepreneurial activity in Ghana, because that is key to driving the economy further. Yeah. So thank you very much for your time, and I welcome your comments, questions, contributions, etc.
Thank you, Dr. Abdul-Razak. This is a wonderful presentation. And indeed, SMEs are very, very important in our part of the world. They provide a lot of jobs for people. And in fact, about 80 to 90% of our economy is made up of SMEs. So obviously very, very important in this era of COVID-19. And it's a topic that we need to discuss. So we take the questions. Dr. Mahmoud has his hand up. Please, Dr. Mahmoud, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Abdul-Razak Alhassan, for the presentation. I really enjoy it, and it touched on us as parents, especially you talk about the educational sector. And then, so I was just wondering whether data was picked for this particular presentation, whether you are sitting in Birmingham or City and doing this presentation, or you are in Ghana, and then how data was picked to be able to come out with this, because I know, yes, COVID came, it has a mixed blessings for the SMEs. It's a mixed blessing. Some are happy, others have gone off completely, especially when you mention the schools. They are suffering. 90% of them are virtually, they've closed down. And the challenge of them too, in terms of coping strategies, you see, they are not customer friendly. They sit at their end and they design online programs. They don't consult, and Online is two-way. You are providing it and somebody is receiving it. Whether the person is ready to receive what you are presenting, they don't take care of that. They haven't taken parents through some kind of training to understand. So the dramatic change has been a problem in Ghana, and a lot of schools have closed. The public sector.
We are losing Dr. Mahmood.
We are losing Dr. Mahmood, but I get the drift of his question, and I'll be able to touch light on it. Yes, as I'm
schools, private sector that is trying, and I know that the private sector, the elite ones have tried. That has been the main challenge of this in terms of the educational sector, so far as their coping strategies are concerned. So let me leave it here. I know others will also have to say something. Thank you very much for the presentation and the exercise done.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud.
Yes, I'm done.
Yes, thank you very much for your comments and the question as well. Yes, I mentioned that this was an ongoing research, and it predated the issue of COVID. But in light of COVID, we also saw an extension and ability to look at the exacerbated effect on SMEs in Ghana. And this has, because we've already established relationships with owner managers, etc., we have been able to still get data from them through virtual means. So what we've done is that this has been an inductive multi-case study and on small, medium enterprises. We've relied on a format that is taking data in a 3-tier approach. I didn't want to go detail. I just wanted to just give an indication of what we were deriving in terms of findings from the data itself. Yes, but we're able to take data prior to COVID, and it is still ongoing. With regards to private schools and their coping strategies, I have been in a position where within lockdown, we have been developing online courses. There have been arguments as to whether we should provide synchronous or asynchronous teaching within those courses that we develop. But you cannot do this in isolation, because this is something that is going to be received by an audience, and there should be that level of consultation with it. So we have had to involve students in our preparations work today. So these schools, for obvious reasons, and in the cases that we know, they have struggled to be able to do that consultation within the very difficult period that they found themselves. But they needed to raise or continue to get that income coming in. And they felt that the only way to do it was to be able to provide or engage students in a virtual way, and therefore they could demand payments from parents. There are examples of certain institutions that have really engaged parents, and they have actually included comments from parents in how they develop strategies to be able to engage students virtually whilst in lockdown. So for the example that I've given, where parents drive in, they give the homework. Some institutions expected parents to give the homework, mark it themselves, do the teaching themselves. But what some institutions have done is they do the teaching synchronously. It is live for students to join through Facebook, etc. The homework is given, then the kids finish the homework, then the parents then drive, leave the books with the teachers at school, they mark it, a day later they go and pick it up. So that has been a collaborative effort, yes. And these institutions have survived. But for some and for many, and we have to be mindful of the economic situation in Ghana, for some, it hasn't been easy to do that, because in terms of the data itself, it's an issue. Whether you have reliable data that students could rely on to engage with these virtual or online teaching that is going on by institutions. Yeah. So thank you very much for your comments and contributions on it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a comment here from Tia Abdullah Robert Aziz. And it goes like, What advice or policies would you give to Ghana government on homegrown strategies in the midst of COVID-19 for almost 6 months?
Okay, thank you. This is a very short but question that requires a lot of thought. I think this research was predicated on the issue of institutional voids. And so in Ghana, the issue here hasn't to do much with the lack of institutions, but the effectiveness of the institutions that are in place to support SMEs. To a larger extent, we go beyond institutions, but also to look at the wider ramifications of the environment and how this affects SMEs. So for many small, medium enterprises, there hasn't been a lot of consultation in developing strategies that would support businesses in Ghana widely. So SMEs in general haven't had that mouthpiece to say what would work for them, as opposed to many major or big enterprises that have existed, that exist within the wider Ghanaian economy. So this hasn't helped. So in terms of how we are able to support, there are a lot of implications for this. And this is the basis of the presentation I've made. We cannot use examples from developed country settings as something that is generalizable and could be replicated within our own setting. So whilst we had COVID coming into different countries, you could see that there were a lot of research grants, some from government within the UK, to investigate how businesses, especially SMEs, the challenges that they had and what they could do in terms of coping strategies. They were given large sums of money for this research, given limited period for people to bid for it and come out with findings to see how well they could support SMEs in the process. These are things that we need to do to find out in context what works within the Ghanaian setting and how we could support SMEs. So that is one thing. Look at our individual case, see what will work, consult with SMEs, find out what their key issues are and what policies we could put in place to address them. The other thing is that in terms of SMEs itself, the legal regime that is able to sort out those institutional voids that exist and how they could take advantage of the support measures that are available. It is weak, and we need to get across, we need to get SMEs involved in decisions that naturally affect how they operate so that we could have policies that are best suited to ensuring that SME survival, growth, and competitiveness is supported within the country itself.
Wow, wonderful. We take our next question. Okay, so I have this question here. Government has rolled up a program in Ghana here to support businesses in the informal economy. And in fact, 600 million Ghana cedi was allocated for this through the NBSSI. But some of the requirements to access this fund includes the PIN, the TIN, that is the tax
number,
number, business certificate, and others. So I look at it and then I was wondering whether government actually knows exactly what exists in the informal economy. So how or what ways would you propose to government to ensure that people in the informal economy really benefit from this coronavirus alleviation program that has been set up by government?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think it is one of the questions that I've encountered over the last couple of years, and it is an issue that has come across. Even within the UK itself, some of the policies that were put forward were not readily accessible to all small, medium enterprises because in terms of the conditions that you had to meet to be able to take advantage of this, not all of them could. And by extension, I'm not surprised that it is happening in Ghana. But my understanding of the Ghanaian economy, especially the informal sector, and I don't have to be in government, and I do know government should understand much better than I do, that we do not have, there's little in terms of formality within the informal sector itself. So in terms of who operates within that economy, is there any way of registering them? And for many of them, you find that they do not have those same numbers, and invariably that is the bane of government, how they even get taxes from the informal economy. So if you bring out measures that then tends to seek that they present all this, for some that even have it, they would actually, under some level of suspicion, consider that it might be a way just to get them to pay taxes later on. So it becomes a difficult proposition, but it is a difficult one in terms of putting policies available for institutions that do not have a way of recognizing them within the economy itself. Anybody at all within the economy could then proceed to take advantage of what government has put in. So that conditionality is important. But however, what government needs to do is to find a way of bringing some level of formality within the informal sector. Particularly, how do you recognize people that are there? Have some form of registration that exists. And we've seen that happen within the finance sector, especially microfinance, where that informal money lending scheme have some form of regulation. And that should be what government should be putting in place. If not, we are going to still have a situation where you are not able to put together or develop strategies or measures that informal sector can take advantage of, because you don't recognize who exactly is operating at that level.
Okay, thank you for that. We take another question from the participants.
Thank you, Doc. Can I go ahead?
Please do.
Thank you very much, Doc, for your presentation. One thing that struck me, and as a student of public policy, I usually do want to ask to solicit people's view. You indicated that we need to really have a biting policy, and the SMEs must be involved in proper negotiation to really extrapolate the factors that are really, affecting them in order to be able to build the kind of resilience that they need. But I would want to ask you for your honest opinion. Do you think that public policy is a sufficient basis for us to get the desired behavior or desired effectiveness in our society? I will cite an example during Dr. Kwame Nkrumah when he was a president. There was this gentleman that he wanted to deport, and they sent it to the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court issued a judgment that the gentleman cannot be deported, before the judgment will reach the Interior Minister, they have already heard about the judgment. They have not received the formal judgment. They quickly deported the gentleman before they received, because in those days, it would take a long time before they would drive and bring the judgment. Recently, Afoko in Ghana, the court said we should release him. Immediately they released him, they rearrested him. So there are policies that we have in our society, but this human being always find a way to decode the system. So I really want to ask your honest opinion. Do you think that every day what we talk about from researchers always say that we need policy, we need to make policy, we need to revise policy? Do you really think that policy is a sufficient basis for us to get a desired behavioral outcome as a country?
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting question. It is essential, but it could be complemented. I think that would be my simple answer. But in terms of extension, let me just elaborate more on this. Policies are there, laws are there, institutions are there, but you require people to make that effective as well. And what you have just said just buttresses the point that a lot of people make, that we cannot just rely on these policies by themselves, but we have to rely on people to be also respective and the understanding that these policies exist and drive to ensure that things are done the proper way. How do you achieve this? It's all about effectiveness. It is making sure that you apply the policies that are in place. You apply the laws that are in place. So my concern is that there is a lack of application, and we need to have control measures that in place that ensure that if these are not being done, then there are agencies that would set up and fight for it. I'm happy to see a lot of civil society groups now in Ghana who are not hiding behind political lines or their own activities, but are coming out and speaking up and having a voice on issues that are pertaining to governance and policies. These are the type of actions that we need to see from the citizenry itself. It is important, and I do admit that, yes, government can put in measures that support this, but to ensure that government listens to small, medium enterprises itself, they need to also have a voice. And how can they have a voice? They have to have a strong union, labor union, that then advocates for issues affecting them. Big enterprises are doing it through lobbying activities, but in any case, we need the small, medium enterprises to also come out together and have a collective voice in seeking what is necessary in their own survival, growth, and competitiveness. There are quite a number of examples beyond what you have cited. And yes, public policy is essential, but it is not the all in all. We need collaborative effort from all key stakeholders, including those that are affected by these policies. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, we take our next question. 2 more or so, then we can go. Dr. Mahmoud, is your hand up again?
Yes, my hand is up again. Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Dr. Alhassan. I think what I'm just going to say is not a question, but anytime I observe people present, especially in academic works like this, I try to be focused. I ask questions based on what the person has presented or the message that the person wants to carry across. And I've observed that, especially the last question that the moderator read out about the government intervention, putting up certain money, and our SMEs don't have the requisite, tools to enable them to be able to access those loans. And then I look at the title of the presenter. He's talking of institutional void and the coping strategies of SMEs. So what it tells you is that that question, I believe, is not within the mandate of what he is doing, because he's already looking at if they are not able to, the institutions are not functioning. They don't, even if they are there, but yet they don't live up to expectations. So how are the SMEs coping? So I was expecting the speaker to look at it from that angle. So far as they cannot access the government monies, what are they doing to ensure that they survive? I think that's what the message he wanted us to get. So usually I try to, as I said, when you make a special academic presentation, I don't go outside too much of the message that you carry. What you carry, I ask questions based on that. So it's not a question, it's just a contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you so much. Yes,
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
So, Dr. Al-Hasan,
yeah,
I noticed particularly in the terms of the strategies related to connection, that there seemed to be some indication that there were developing modes of trust between SMEs, stakeholders, the wider constituencies in which they were operating. Is that fair? Have you noticed that? Because it seems that seems to play into quite a lot of issues for the 21st century. We are facing lots of crises. And I just wanted you to comment, if you would, on the relationship between, you've talked quite a lot about establishing competitive or retaining competitiveness, but I just wondered if you might say something about the relationship between competition and trust and collaboration between small and medium-sized enterprises in a crisis like COVID.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's an interesting thing, and this was extensively looked up. In terms of the findings that are coming across, and this is not conclusive yet, what we have seen is that there is a lack of trust within the legal regime that exists within the country, largely because of the length of time it takes for issues to be resolved. I'll get a conclusion even when you take up a legal route to solving a problem between yourself as an SME and a collaborative partner. So what SMEs are doing, especially during this COVID, when they have no time to draft legal agreements, etc., is to rely on referrals and to build relationships. Absolutely. Now, we even have some that rely on their pastors, etc., to refer other members to them. And this way, you have a person as the pastor being a mediator. And it is the basis of that control that the person has in terms of referring you that they can proceed on building this relationship. But extensively, we are also observing that even small, medium enterprises that are in competition with other firms or institutions within the same space, sector, are extending a hand of assistance to be able to have some mutual outcome out of some collaborative effort. I'll give you an example. In terms of one SME had supplies but couldn't go into production because they didn't have any market or demand for that the products at the time of COVID. However, the other one had a ready market available that they could they needed to meet, but they didn't have the supplies. So it is giving those small contracts to otherwise a company that would have been your competitor to be able to survive in that realm between both SMEs. And this was something that was interesting to see. We also saw the level of partnership that were existing. So even when it came to hoteliers and resorts, etc., they are making use of bloggers because with the institution of these lockdown measures, people are still not confident enough to go out thinking that things are not as normal as they should.
Yes. They're not safe.
Yes. So free ride along opportunities are given to these bloggers to document their journeys and use of the facilities that these SMEs
the sort of social influencers.
Yes. Yeah. And then people can then see that, no, they are open for business and therefore could come. So that is also the level of partnership that we are seeing. So extending between celebrities, bloggers, and SMEs, etc. So there are various levels of this that have come across.
You might also almost say that there is it's an example of mutualism and reciprocity, really.
We have arrived at the same point here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm sure we are done now. Do we have any other question? Any other? Okay, so I want to say that this is shared on Facebook. And at the peak of it, we had about 15 people watching it live on Facebook. And then here we had about 30 people at the peak of it. So this video will still be available on Facebook and you can watch it at any time. It will also be edited because it's recorded now. It will be edited and shared on our YouTube page. I want to thank all the participants, Dr. Abdul-Razak and Reverend Tony Bradley, and our viewers. I want to thank all of you, those in In Europe, we say that good evening to you all, and those in North America, we say good afternoon, and then our viewers from Asia, we say good morning. So we'll see you next week as we come with another exciting edition. Thank you so much and have a good night.